Gyms are supposed to be one of the safest, most ordinary places in our lives. Sweat, headphones, the clank of iron, people in their own little routines. That's what makes it worse when something ordinary flips and becomes wrong. Tonight I want to take you through 3 real accounts from people who treated the gym like a second home, until the gym stopped feeling like a safe place at all. These are not ghost stories, not urban legends. These are moments that began with a nod at the squat rack and ended with the kind of fear you can't easily explain to someone who's never been looked at the same way again. If you like true scary stuff, hit subscribe and stay with me through all 3. Trust me, save the last one for last. My name's Nolan. I was 28, lifting 5 mornings a week, the kind of guy who kept a tight routine. I worked as a software engineer, which meant long hours and a lot of sitting. The gym was my counterbalance. Belt, chalk, headphones, simple. Josh showed up one winter month when I was benching midweek. He had a smile and a beard that looked like he'd groomed it for Instagram. He was the kind of easy-laughing guy who could make gym anxiety feel ridiculous with one offhand joke. The first few interactions were exactly that. A spot on a heavy set, a joke about protein, a thumbs up as he left to walk his dog. He was polite. That's what made me put up my guard much later than I should have. He added me on Instagram after a week or 2. I thought, fine, guy from the gym, nothing weird. He messaged once or twice about technique, short videos of deadlift form with a thumbs up emoji. That felt normal. Then the tone shifted from technical to personal. The messages started coming at odd hours. A compliment here, a "you're hilarious" there, and he began using my name in a way that felt anchoring. It's a small thing until it isn't. He stopped calling me that bench guy and began calling me Nolan in every message, sometimes 3 times in a row. It made me notice him more. At the gym, he would find reasons to be near me. If I took the squat rack on the right, Josh would take the one next to me, even though there were free racks elsewhere. He'd laugh at my jokes louder than the situation warranted. He learned my coffee order at the cafe attached to the gym, espresso with oat milk, and would show up after me, ordering the same thing, then stand a little too close while scrolling his phone. He had a way of leaning in when he spoke, just enough that I could feel the vibration of his words. It made me look for his face even when I wasn't trying to. There were small flags I ignored because they were small. He started sending playlists curated specifically for my morning tempo, an effort, maybe, to be helpful. He started showing up at casual gym events, a community lift on Saturdays, a fundraiser 5K downtown. I told myself people make friends at the gym, but he began to text if I didn't show up, not asking if I was okay, demanding to know why I was absent. The first time he called my number at midnight, I didn't pick up. His voice on the voicemail felt like someone pressed his face near the speaker, too close. He said something like, "You disappeared." The word choice sent a sliver of cold down my neck. The festival was the first real red flag. It was an outdoor event, music and food. Not the kind of place I would expect to see anyone connected to my workout schedule. But there he was, same beard, same smile, dancing in a crowd I didn't associate with our gym. He waved when he saw me. He came over and pretended it was a coincidence, talked about the band, how good the tacos were. He chattered the whole time, and I laughed because that's what you do. You nod and move through the moment. But later that night his text shifted again. Photos he'd taken of me from across the festival, perfectly framed shots where my face was visible, but it was clear I hadn't known he was taking them. He captioned one with an inside joke about my deadlift form. That felt like a boundary he had already stepped over, and then justified after the fact. The bar situation felt like it should have been the worst of it. An evening where one too many people thought they were entitled to someone else's time. It wasn't. We were at a local place that did cheap wings and had a pool table. He followed me in like he lived there. The bar was dim, the music made us lean in to hear each other. He pressed closer, laughed at everything, and then, when I tried to leave, he offered to walk me to my car. I said no. He said, "Come on, it's just a few blocks." I said again no and started to walk away. He came after me. He called my name, not gentle, not casual, the kind of calling that insists you stop and look. At my door that night, he tried an intimacy I hadn't invited, the hand on my shoulder that lingered too long, a comment about how my apartment wasn't as big as he imagined. That should have set off alarm bells in a neighborhood full of stoic college kids and cheap studios. I told him firmly to leave. He got the message that night, but he didn't process it like most people do. He turned it into a negotiation. That's when the voice outside my window started. It was Tuesday, maybe 2 weeks after the bar. I'd stayed late at work and come home exhausted. My apartment is on the second floor, so the bedroom windows are a few feet above ground level. I locked the deadbolt, left the blinds half closed, and went to bed with my phone face down. At about 2:13 a.m., I know because of the timestamp on the Ring notification later that confirmed it, I woke to laughter. Low, breathy, like someone imitating happiness to make the neighbors feel comfortable. I sat up and listened. Footsteps on the sidewalk, the scrape of a can against concrete, the kind of breathing that isn't yours. Then the first call came in, a missed call from an unsaved number. I checked my phone and saw a voicemail, one of those you can't make out without hesitating to play because you're waiting for something worse. I didn't play it. Instead, I walked to the window and eased the blinds open enough to peer through with one eye. There was a figure standing under the street lamp just beyond the tree line, his silhouette small against the halo of the light. I could make out a beard. He looked up at my window and shouted something muffled. I asked aloud, stupidly, "Who's there?" A voice answered, but not any voice I would expect in a casual confrontation. It was his voice, the thing that had been in voicemails, in messages, friendly at the bar, and it carried an edge that made the hair on my arm stand up. He called my name. Not just Nolan, but Nolan, in a cadence that sounded rehearsed. I asked, "Are you outside my house?" And the answer, just one word, was, "No." The way he said it left no room for interpretation. He wasn't admitting anything. It was a refusal wrapped in a whisper. My stomach dropped because the only meaning I could attach to that answer was that he could be anywhere he wanted to be, and was choosing to play games with what I perceived as a boundary. I told myself to call the police or at least call the building's security, but my hands were ice. I was on the edge of panic and rationalization, the place where common sense gets foggy and your thoughts bounce between, "This is ridiculous," and "Get out now." He left soon after, or at least his silhouette walked away. I lay for hours, fully awake. When morning came, I realized he had been there long enough to leave something. A folded note slipped under my door. It said only, "Saw you." No context, no threat, nothing you could use to justify the fear, but enough to gnaw at your sleep. I went to the gym that morning because that's what I did, because routines feel like anchors when your life gets unmoored. I told myself telling someone would be sufficient. I told the front desk I had a weird voicemail and a strange note. They were sympathetic, offered to show me the security footage. Nothing showed up. No shadow on the sidewalk, no figure under the lamp at that time. The footage showed only static at the exact minute. That was the first time I realized there are moments where what you experience and the objective evidence don't line up, and the gap between them is where paranoia lives. He escalated slowly from there. The DMs intensified. Photos of my neighborhood I didn't recognize until I realized the angle matched a street I walked down daily. Once, he texted a photo of a gym locker with my initials on the towel draped over it. Typing that out sounds small, but when you see it in your messages, it's massive. He would show up at events I planned to be at, and if I took a day off, he would appear the next day and ask me why I'd missed him. At a festival, he had taken my picture. At a bar, he had followed. Online, he stalked posts I'd liked weeks earlier. It felt like a relationship with someone who had learned every one of my habits and then weaponized them into evidence that he knew enough to be dangerous. I tried the obvious. I blocked numbers, I changed privacy settings, I ignored messages. That felt like ammunition for him. He interpreted silence as a challenge. The night the tire was slashed was the first time the danger invaded something that belonged to me, but wasn't me. I left work later than usual and walked to my street, keys ready. My car sat where I always parked. The driver's side tire had been punctured, a clean gash. The rubber hissed when I pressed against the rim. No note, no message, nothing but ordinary violence against an ordinary object. It was the kind of property damage that said, I can get to your things. I can inconvenience you. The slashed tire belonged to me, but it also belonged to my neighborhood. My route to the gym, my ability to leave without checking the shadows twice. I called the police. They came, took a report, and said it looked like vandalism. They asked if I knew anyone who might want to do this. I told them about Josh. I handed over the messages, the photos, the voicemail. They listened, exchanged a look, and promised to keep an eye around the area. They added notes to my file. I installed cameras, one over the door, one facing the street. I put up motion-activated lights. The cameras didn't capture anything the night the tire went flat. There was a hollow feeling in that absence, like a room missing a portrait you didn't know you loved. I moved gyms, not because the staff or the members had done anything wrong, but because the place where he'd first leaned into my space had become a small world where he could find me. If the first gym was the scene of our acquaintance, the second was an attempt to erase the map he had built in his head. I changed my routes to work. I started leaving the gym with a friend more often. Paranoia became an extra weight I carried with my gym bag. But moving gyms didn't make the messages stop. They trickled on for a while, weeks of absence, and then a direct message with a photo taken at a gas station I'd stopped at for coffee. The image had been zoomed in, so only my hands on the disposable cup were visible, but it was enough. It's the granular, mundane things that create the story he wanted to write about me. When I work, where I sleep, how I calm down. He knew names of baristas. He knew my favorite corner of the park. He knew the time I liked to stretch before weights. He would mimic these facts in conversation to prove it. When the police told me there was only so much they could do without a clear and present threat, the truth in their words landed like a slap. Law can catalog harassment and sometimes intervene, but the shadow of someone who has studied you takes longer to dispel. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that follows that. Not the physical kind from heavy sets, but the kind that eats sleep and trust. I started to feel watched in places that never felt like the gym. Streetlights on my walk home cast new dimensions. Every car that lingered at an intersection got a look. People who asked for directions were suddenly characters in a story I was reading for the first time. I felt ridiculous saying it out loud to friends, until they saw how tight my shoulders were, how I flinched at a joke. The cameras did eventually catch something, a blurry image at 3:14 a.m. of a person moving across the sidewalk in front of my building, head down, a dark coat, the brim of a hat obscuring most of the face. It was grainy, imperfect, not a smoking gun. But when I paused the frame, there was a detail I'd never thought to expect. A glint on a finger, the metallic reflection that might be a ring or a key. Nothing overt, nothing that screamed criminal, just an ordinary movement under ordinary light. The police were able to enhance it enough to connect the profile to Josh. It's a strange comfort when law enforcement can do what you cannot: attach a name to an image. He was served with a restraining order after that. For a while, the messages stopped. For real this time. The breathing in my ears quieted, and sleep returned in longer stretches. But there was always the knowledge that he had been so close without being prosecuted for something more serious. There was the knowledge that if he had wanted to hurt me, the slashed tire could have been a prelude, and the voicemail outside the window could have been rehearsed in front of a different audience. That knowledge is the sticky residue of the whole thing. Doesn't go away. I tell you this not to escalate the horror beyond what it was, but because these are the kinds of things that start small and invade. A friendly spot in the rack, a playlist, a festival photo. That's how the ordinary becomes a map for someone else's attention, and how attention, when weaponized, becomes terrifying. When I left the gym for the last time, I thought of how human the early stages had felt. He had been a regular who liked to talk. He had been a guy with a gym bag and the same pair of worn trainers. He had been a person who knew how to be charming in public. The scariest part was that charm hid a pattern that only revealed itself once you started paying attention. Name anchoring, photos taken without permission, appearing at places I frequented. The shift from polite to possessive. I moved not because the neighborhood was unsafe in an unending way, but because my routines had been compromised. Safety isn't just physical defenses. It's the ability to walk into a place and not have your muscles tighten. Losing that is a different kind of loss. It's the feeling of being watched in your favorite spots, and the mental tally of little moments that, in retrospect, fit together into a map. That's where Nolan's story ends for now. At the slashed tire, the restraining order served, the cameras installed, the late-night messages tapering off. The emotional fallout lingered, alarms on my phone, eyes that kept scanning crowds, a reluctance to be alone in sweaty rooms where strangers used to only be strangers. If you think that was unsettling, wait until you hear the next one. This one digs into obsession born from a breakup, and it gets ugly fast. Lewis's story starts in a small town where people know each other by color of hoodie and the way their boots squeak. He was 22, a college kid who treated the campus gym like a safe zone, the kind of place where you can be anonymous and still belong. His friend Colton used to come in after classes, always loud, always with that sort of easy confidence that makes rooms rotate toward you. That confidence was a magnet for Addie, Colton's on-again, off-again girlfriend. At first, Addie's presence at the gym looked like a soap opera subplot, the three of them orbiting each other with the rhythms of the town. She'd sit in a red hoodie, eyes wet as if she'd been crying, and be gone before anyone could ask if she was okay. Once, Louis says, there was a moment in the locker room where she was sobbing so hard no one could make sense of it. Colton tried to help. She brushed him away like a bee you were supposed to ignore. That should have been the end of it. An emotional day, a relationship in crisis. But the red hoodie kept showing up. Louis remembers the night he saw her in the lot. He'd come out from the gym, keys in hand, thinking about the midterm he'd been studying for, when a figure in a red hoodie was sitting in a car 2 spaces down. The engine was off. When she saw him, she smiled in a way that wasn't the warm, easy smile people use in small towns. It was the kind that said she'd been waiting. Later, messages arrived from an unknown number. Ephemeral photos. A blurred picture of a front door. Once a close-up of a knuckle with a smudge of what could have been dirt. The messages escalated to something worse, threatening texts. Then a photograph of a knife posted from an account he didn't recognize. He called Colton. Colton, who had dated Addie on and off, swore it wasn't her. But the police, once involved, corroborated parts of the story. Addie had been present at certain times, arrested on suspicion after a night of pounding on windows next to Lewis's place. In the early hours, Louis woke to his house shaking from knocks at the front door, laughter pitched like a something not entirely human. He told me about the sound of his door shaking, not just a knock but the whole frame groaning under pressure. Hysterical laughter outside that didn't sound joyful felt like something trying to intimidate, to say, "You are mine." When the officers arrived, they found her on the porch, shaking the doorknob, her breath visible in the cold air, eyes wild. She admitted later to being there. She was arrested. The charge was property trespass and harassment. That should have been a full stop. Yet the lingering question, how did she find his address, hung in the air like smoke. In a small town, it could be as simple as asking a neighbor. Or maybe it was some detail slipped in a conversation that made the map easier to follow. The point is that when someone decides to escalate, getting from wanting to knowing is often alarmingly straightforward. I'll pick up Lewis's story in just a moment, but first, have you ever had that nagging feeling that someone notices you more than they should? Think about that one moment when a person's attention switched from casual to focused. Keep that in the back of your mind as we move into the next part. That nagging feeling I asked you to keep in the back of your mind, that's exactly where Lewis lived for a while. My name's Louis. I was 22 and half convinced that nothing dramatic ever happened in our town. We knew people by their trucks, by the way their hoodies squeaked when they pulled them over their heads. The gym was a place you went between classes and shifts. You put in the work and went home. For a minute it all felt normal. The first time I noticed the red hoodie, I told myself it wasn't worth thinking about. She sat in her car with the engine off, lights dim, 2 spaces over from where I usually parked. When she saw me, she smiled, but it wasn't friendly, not like someone who'd just run into a classmate. It felt like someone waiting for the beginning of a scene. Later that night, I got a text from an unknown number. A grainy photo of the hallway outside my building. No caption. The message that followed was a single sentence that didn't try to be polite. It said, "I see you." Small things piled up quickly. She showed up at Colton's workouts. She'd be in the back doing stretches, hood up, eyes red like she'd been crying hard enough to ruin the mascara. Once she was in the locker room sobbing so badly, someone whispered to Colton to step away and give her space, and Colton tried, but she pushed him off like you would push a hand away from a wound. It made us uneasy, but people have breakups and breakups make chaos. That's what we told ourselves. The escalation didn't march. It slid. A few days after that locker room episode, I was heading to my car, keys in hand, thinking about calculus in a paper I hadn't started, when I noticed the red hoodie again, this time in a parked car with the window cracked. The engine was cold. She smiled, slow and wide, and something in that smile made my stomach fold inward. Later that night, a series of texts came from an unknown account. A photo of a door frame, a close-up of a knuckle, a shot of a path outside my house at dusk. Each one was innocuous if you looked at it alone, unless you were the person in the photo's periphery and knew the places it captured. It got worse fast. There was a late knock, no polite knock, the kind that shakes the whole doorframe, and then laughter like someone who'd been practicing hysteria in front of a mirror. Imagine your house shuddering, the sound of wood pinging under pressure. I remember standing at the top step, breath fogging in the winter air, and a feeling of my chest being hollowed out by the sound. When the cops came and found her on the porch, shaking the knob as if the lock were a riddle she could solve by pounding, she had that look people give when they've stopped pretending to be normal. Her breath was visible, hands trembling, eyes too wide for the face she had. She later admitted she'd been there. They arrested her for trespassing and harassment. The officers told me later that she'd been present at times that matched what I'd reported. She didn't deny some of it when they asked. That was supposed to make everything okay. It didn't. The most unnerving thing wasn't the handcuffs. It was the simple question that none of us could answer. How did she find my address? In a small place, yes, you can happen across someone. Neighbors talk. But there are quieter routes. An overheard sentence, a passing comment, something noticed at a party, that can become a trail of crumbs. I replayed conversations in my head, trying to remember whether I'd ever given out a detail too freely. Maybe I had mentioned my apartment complex name. Maybe someone else had been careless. The point is that an escalation in obsession rarely needs much help to become action. The messages kept coming for a while, even after the arrest. One of them was a photo of a knife sent from an account with no name. There was no caption, only the image. Close up, clinical. The police told me that image alone didn't equate to a charge unless it could be tied directly to a threat. They told me they could and would catalog it, and they did. They took screenshots, added the account to the report, and kept a log. It's a strange thing to hand over the pieces of your life like evidence, to let strangers catalog the things that make you feel unsafe. It felt like putting your fear in a box and labeling it. Colton, who'd been dating Addie on and off, swore she'd never hurt anyone. Swore it in a way that made me trust him, because in small towns, trust is often a transaction between people who have histories. When she was arrested that night, we all wanted a definitive end, a stop to the frantic feeling. But there are stops that only the law can create and stops that only time can create. The first was quick, handcuffs, booking, a charge. The second was slow, and sometimes it doesn't finish. Even after the officers stood in my kitchen and told me they'd done what they could, I kept wondering about the practicalities. Did she know where Colton lived? Had she ever been inside my building? The police were patient but clear. Sometimes people get information in ways that are boring and administrative, not cinematic. Someone overshares in the wrong place. An address gets said at a party. The small town provides a paper map if someone cares to read it. Once someone decides to escalate, the tools they use can be alarmingly mundane. The emotional fallout made the ordinary feel like an instrument. My mailboxes, ones I'd never thought about twice, seemed like possible message boards. A ringing phone was never neutral. Sleep became a ledger of how many times I'd checked each lock. I stopped walking certain blocks after dark. I drove different routes just to feel like I was changing the map, even if the change was symbolic. The red hoodie was a lesson in how obsession can wrap itself around a person's life and squeeze until simple routines snap. Eventually, things quieted. The arrest felt like a punctuation mark, but not the final sentence. Addie's name was in a police report. There were forms to sign, statements to give, and a predictable shredding of privacy. But the question of how she'd gotten the address lingered. And sometimes the unknown is the worst part. It's easy to sleep when you can point at a reason. It's harder to sleep when the reason is blank space. If you've ever been watched in a place you thought of as safe, if you've ever felt that small animal spasm of panic when a familiar face appears too often, then you'll know why stories like this make you look around. Keep that unease in mind, because the last one I'm about to tell you ends with a run your body remembers the moment it happens. I was 25 and living in the city, a regular at a big crowded chain gym. You know the type, rows of treadmills like a small airport, TVs humming in the corners, the hum of conversation mixed with weights. I liked to go in the evenings after work. That was my decompression hour. The first time I noticed him, I didn't actually see his face. I saw the way he never lifted anything heavier than a towel. He occupied machines without using them much, like someone who wanted to be present rather than partake. He always had a hat on, not a baseball cap pulled low for privacy, more like a hat with a brim that cast his eyes in shadow. He sat on a bench or a machine, legs folded, phone angled so he could look up at the people moving around the room. He never broke a sweat. If you went by appearance, he could have been a coach on break or a guy reading between sets. But there was a rhythm to his watching. He'd follow the arc of my head when I lifted, glance at my hands as I chalked them, and then look away fast enough for it to feel like a performance, like he was trying to make sure I noticed him noticing. The first time he appeared outside the gym was at a bar, late on a Thursday when I'd gone with co-workers. I saw him at the other end of the room, hat on, drink in hand, watching. Not by chance. He had a posture of someone trying to blend into the fixtures, leaning slightly, one elbow on the rail, eyes tracing movement. When I left the bar, he was outside, halfway down the block. I told myself to take the city rationalization. Strangers and cities sometimes cross paths twice. But then he was at the bus stop the next morning, hat on, reading something on his phone with the screen down. He would appear where I didn't expect him, not doing anything overt, never aggressive, never verbal, but present in a way that added up. I started changing my schedule. I moved my workouts to early mornings. He moved too. I should have called it an escalation there. Instead, I kept thinking of the smallness of the effort. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe I was making a story of nothing. Then I saw him on the trail. It was one of those late summer evenings when the air still held heat in the pavement. The trail runs behind a strip of trees and runs along a small creek. People go there to clear their heads. I prefer it because it's quiet, because you can hear your own breathing and measure your pace against the rhythm of your feet. I was a few miles in when I noticed a sound that didn't match the trail, a pace that matched mine, not off to the side or passing, but settling in behind me at the same rhythm. You know that moment where your body starts to plan ahead for escape? It happened to me in a single breath. I accelerated a little to see if the footsteps would pass, and they matched my faster steps. I slowed, and they slowed. Trees blurred around the edges. My phone was in a pocket, useless for anything but making noise if I could open it. The man in the hat kept his distance, maybe 15 or 20 yards, but the distance was constant, like a measure of intent. I turned a corner and for a second thought maybe he'd lost me. He turned the corner too. When he closed the gap to within 20 paces, I did something stupid and perfectly human. I tried to speak first. "Hey," I yelled, more to the silence than to him. He didn't answer. He matched me step for step. There's a sound your throat makes when you call for help, the pitch that scrambles in your chest, and it found its way out when I started running. I burst out of the trees and onto a paved road that leads to a busier street. My lungs burned. I sprinted, arms pumping, and I swear the sound of my shoes was like a small drum roll of panic. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. The Hat Man was closer now, maybe 10 paces behind, and his pace didn't look panicked. He wasn't chasing in short, desperate bursts. He was matching. That mattered more than anything. It meant calculation, not impulse. The curb, I screamed, one of those primal, raw shouts you hope other humans will hear and answer. A woman with a stroller looked up. A couple coming back from dinner slowed. The Hat Man stopped at the edge of the street, and for a second the city was a stage. Headlights, faces, the slam of a car door. Then he turned and melted into the dark between two parked trucks, an outline swallowed by night. I remember my knees going weak as if my body finally accepted the release of running. I reported it to the gym. They were polite, surprised, and then procedural. "We'll look into it," they said, like they do for things that are plausible but hard to prove. I changed my membership the next week. I moved to a smaller facility with fewer strangers and more people I could name. It felt like a small, private victory. But the residual fear was stubborn. For weeks afterward, my head searched the crowd for that hat-brim silhouette. In public, it's small things, the turn of a neck, a pause too long on one set of eyes, that make you think you might see him. The worst part was the intimacy of being watched in a place you thought was neutral. Gyms are where people come to change their bodies, but they also become a place where you strip away defenses. You put down a bag, unroll a mat, put your life in a square of space, and expect privacy in the movement of your own routine. When someone watches with intent, the ordinary gestures of warming up or re-racking weights become a narrative you are unwillingly in. That feeling doesn't leave in a week. I canceled the membership, but cancellation doesn't erase memory. I started telling friends where I was going before I went. I ran with headphones and a friend when I could. I adjusted the times I left work. Eventually, the constancy of my awareness dulled enough that I could breathe without the tightness in my chest, but the awareness never disappeared. That's the real cost, the small daily concessions you make to feel safe again. When I tell this now, even months later, I can still hear the creak of the trail under my feet and the soft tap of steps that matched my pace. I can still see the hat leave its shadow on the edge of the road. It's not cinematic. It's mundane and methodical. And that's what makes it so unsettling. The person who watches you daily is terrifying because they learn your schedule before they decide to cross it. All three of these stories end in different ways: restraining orders, arrests, canceled memberships, but they share the same architecture. Ordinary interactions become a map for someone else. Technology, proximity, and obsession can turn a person who once seemed harmless into a figure who disrupts every routine you've built. A name, a playlist, a hoodie, a hat. Small things that accumulate into a pattern. The result is not always dramatic in a single night. Sometimes it's the slow, corrosive feeling that your world will never feel quite normal again. We talk about safety like it's a checklist. Locks, cameras, a number to call. Those things matter. But the psychological weight, the way your body remembers the night you thought you were safe, is harder to fix. It's the sleeplessness after a ring notification at 2 a.m. The way a laugh in a bar tugs at your hands. The instinctive scan of a parking lot for a face you once trusted. That fatigue is real, and it sticks. So what do these stories teach? Not a tactic, not a fail-safe, but a reminder. The warning signs often start small. Respect your instincts. If someone anchors to your name, to your routine, to your social media in ways that make your skin crawl, that's not overreacting. If a person's watching fits into patterns, appearing in places you frequent, sending photos of where you live, showing up after being asked not to, those patterns matter. The law can sometimes step in, and people can be arrested. But there is a friction between feeling threatened and proving you are. That gap is where fear grows. I don't want to leave you in a place of helplessness. I want you to carry the weight of these stories as a caution, not as a rule that the world is always unsafe. Most of our interactions remain ordinary, and most people are decent. But decency can hide obsession, and obsession can look like friendliness at first. That is the chilling part. The ordinary flips, slowly at times, suddenly at others, and when it does, it takes the place you trusted with it. These were 3 genuine gym horror stories. A man who turned attention into harassment and left a slashed tire as proof. A small-town spiral that ended in a porch arrest but left an unanswered question about how someone found an address. And a quiet watcher whose steady steps became the reason a run turned into a sprint for help. Each one started with something as normal as a nod across the weight rack and moved into territory that made a place you visit for strength feel fragile. If any of these gave you chills, share your experience in the comments. If you've ever had a moment where a place stopped feeling safe, say so. And subscribe for more true horror stories. And remember, sometimes the scariest things are the ones that happen in the light, where you least expect them.